Welcome to Whispers of Crime.
A mother watches her 12-year-old daughter walk into the woods singing. The girl waves back. She never comes out.
Oh, this is...
They find her the next day, raped, shot twice. June 27, 1946, Muriel Drinkwater. 78 years later, nobody arrested. But police have DNA, they have suspects, they have the answers. So why won't they tell anyone?
That one image of a mother watching her daughter wave goodbye for the last time.
Yeah.
It's just absolutely haunting. And that question, why won't they tell anyone, it just hangs over this entire tragedy, doesn't it?
It's the central question. In 2008, investigators found her school coat just forgotten in police storage.
After all that time.
After decades. And on it, a semen stain preserved for over 60 years. And it was marked by a 1946 investigator who had circled it with a yellow crayon.
Like a yellow crayon.
A yellow crayon. From that, they extracted DNA. At the time, it was the oldest sample ever recovered in a global murder investigation. And it ruled out the main suspect everyone, for decades, believed was guilty.
That's incredible. A simple act of foresight by an investigator, working in a sort of forensic dark age becomes the key 60 years later.
And the trail didn't stop there. A BBC documentary, years later, identified another man. A really strong suspect, someone whose connection to the case was deeply unsettling.
Okay.
They tested his family's DNA. The police got the results.
Yeah.
They refused to release them.
They refused to release them. I don't understand that. Why would you actively block the final piece of the puzzle? The killer is almost certainly long dead. Closure is the only thing left. What could possibly outweigh the truth for her family?
Well, it gets stranger. In 2010, so 2 years after they got that DNA, Scotland Yard did something truly shocking. They sealed every single file from public access.
They sealed them.
After 64 years as an open case, suddenly nobody can see the evidence. They know something. What are they hiding about the murder of the Little Nightingale?
Welcome to Whispers of Crime.
Follow Whispers of Crime on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, and other podcast platforms for daily updates on every crime. And subscribe to our YouTube channel, Whispers of Crime.
So let's start at the beginning, with the girl at the center of all this.
We begin with Muriel Drinkwater. She was just 12 years old. The date is June 27th, 1946. She's a student, and she's just walking home from Gowerton Grammar School near Swansea in Wales.
And in her local community, Penllergaer, she had this nickname, didn't she? A really poignant one.
She did. They called her the Little Nightingale.
Because she loved to sing.
She was always singing. Later on, the press would start calling her the gentle girl. It paints this picture of pure, vulnerable childhood innocence.
And that image is so important because it creates such a stark contrast with what happened next.
It's crucial. Muriel was last seen by her mother. She waved goodbye. She was only about 500 yards from their home, Tyweldew Farm, right there on the edge of Penllergaer Woods.
So close to safety.
So close. And the specific song she was heard singing as she walked away, just moments before she vanished, was the nursery rhyme, Little Boy Blue.
Little Boy Blue. The juxtaposition of that symbol of complete childhood safety with the absolute horror that followed is just heartbreaking. It feels like the definitive moment of innocence being shattered.
She walked into those woods and she never came out. After an agonizing night of searching, her body was found the next day. A police inspector found her, and the brutality of the crime was immediately clear. It was shocking, to a nation that had just come through 6 years of war. She had been raped, bludgeoned by some object that they never found, and then shot twice, directly in the chest.
Raped, bludgeoned, and shot twice. That combination of attacks, it feels disorganized, but at the same time, it's this incredibly aggressive rage, almost like an attempt to ensure death multiple times over.
It's what forensic experts call overkill, and the scene itself spoke volumes. Her body was found with one arm raised and her eyes wide open. It just suggests the absolute terror of her final moments. And critically, they found the firearm at the scene, a WWI-era Colt .45 pistol.
A military weapon. So that links this crime directly back to the very violence the world had supposedly just left behind.
Precisely. And the gun was very specific. It had been modified with Perspex stocks.
That's Perspex.
It's a type of acrylic plastic. Researchers have noted the symbolism of this. You have the childhood innocence of Little Boy Blue colliding with the cold, metallic military reality of a modified Colt .45.
The fact that the killer used a military weapon in a remote Welsh wood just months after the war ended That suggests something about him, doesn't it?
It suggests either a military background or, and this is maybe more disturbing, a preoccupation with violence and weaponry that he brought back with him.
So we have these two very distinct forms of violence, the controlled, lethal force of the gunshot, and then this disorganized, furious aggression of the bludgeoning.
Right.
Did the police ever figure out what the second weapon was?
No, never. The blunt object used to bludgeon her was never located. It's just another one of the frustrating unknowns that has plagued this case from the very beginning.
And given that this happened so soon after World War II, the region was already recovering from trauma, facing all this uncertainty. How did this investigation in 1946 compare to other major crimes of the time? I mean, what was the psychological effect on Wales?
The scale of the investigation shows just how deep the psychological shock was. Post-war Britain was trying so hard to get back to normal, and this crime against a singing child was just a terrifying disruption of that. For 1946, the original investigation was, it was unparalleled in how many resources they threw at it.
What kind of resources are we talking about?
Mostly manpower, just sheer manpower. They interviewed 20,000 men across Wales. 20,000. And they conducted a massive 150 square mile house-to-house investigation. Every single man in the region was essentially required to account for his whereabouts.
I can't even imagine. That kind of localized dragnet doesn't just hunt for the killer. It casts a shadow of suspicion over every man in the community.
It must have been socially devastating. Suspicion was everywhere, and they were gathering every scrap of evidence they could in that pre-DNA era. They found cigarette butts, candy wrappers, anything to try and establish some kind of routine or habit of the killer.
And of course, the press latched onto this.
Immediately. The local newspapers nicknamed it the Little Red Riding Hood murder.
And that media framing is so critical to how the case endured, isn't it? By calling it the Little Red Riding Hood murder, the press immediately sets up this narrative. Muriel is the vulnerable girl in the red cape, and there's a predatory wolf hiding among them.
Absolutely. That narrative fueled public anxiety for decades. And the failure to find the killer quickly just perpetuated this idea that a monster was operating completely undetected. The case became so complex, so sensitive, that Scotland Yard, the London Metropolitan Police, they got involved very early on.
And that early national involvement, you said that's significant. Why is their early involvement so key to the sealing of the files 64 years later?
Because their participation elevated the case from a local tragedy to a matter of national criminal record. It provided the administrative mechanism, the national security or official secrecy route that allowed for the shocking action they took in 2010.
The sealing of all the case files.
Right. It suggests that even that initial 1946 investigation uncovered some complexity or political sensitivity that was never meant for public consumption. To think that documents, written with fountain pens and carbon paper are now protected by modern secrecy laws, it's a profound source of tension in this case.
So with 20,000 men interviewed and no immediate arrests, the police and the community, they had to start focusing on someone.
He did. And the first and perhaps most tragic figure to fall under that cloud of suspicion was a boy named Hubert Hoyles.
Hubert Hoyles was only 13 years old at the time. He was the last person confirmed to have seen Muriel alive.
He was.
It's hard to imagine the burden of that knowledge, and then the sheer cruelty of a community turning its suspicion onto a child witness.
The emotional toll was immense. You know how it is in close-knit communities. If the real killer isn't found, suspicion just settles on the nearest, most vulnerable person. And for decades, Hubert Hoyles carried that weight. He spoke about it later in life, how this silent accusation just blighted his entire life. He said he lived, and I'm quoting him, with the knowledge that some people in the community suspected me.
He became another victim of the tragedy in a way, forced to carry the community's displaced fear and guilt. But his testimony, did it provide any actual leads, despite the suspicion?
It did, though those leads were often just overshadowed by the suspicion directed at him. Hoyles described encountering this mysterious, stern-looking man a few weeks before the murder near the woods where Muriel disappeared.
Okay, what was the description?
He described the man as being in his 30s with thick, fluffy hair, and he spoke with a local accent.
So, a potential stalker, someone casing the location. And this was identified by the very boy who ended up carrying the stigma of the murder for decades. It's a critical detail that seems to have just gotten lost in the public narrative.
It really speaks to the failure of the initial investigation to move from mass panic to a more targeted focus. The sheer magnitude of the public grief was a factor itself. The emotional response was just overwhelming. 3,000 mourners attended Muriel's funeral.
3,000.
It just demonstrates how deeply this crime pierced the heart of post-war Wales. It created this atmosphere that was just ripe for misdirected rage and suspicion.
And so, as the investigation inevitably stalled, the community's attention gravitated towards a pre-existing target. A figure who had already proven he was the wolf the press had described. And this brings us to Harold Jones.
Harold Jones was the ultimate historical prime suspect. He was already a figure of immense notoriety in Wales, a convicted double child killer.
Right. In 1921, when he was just 15, he murdered 2 young girls, Frida Burnell, who was 8, and Florence Little, who was 11, a child killing other children.
Exactly.
So what was his timeline leading up to Muriel's murder in 1946?
Well, this is the critical connection point. Jones was sentenced to life in prison in 1921, but he was controversially released on parole in 1941 after serving only 20 years. He was free during the later years of the war and, even more critically, was discharged from the Army in February 1946.
February 1946, Muriel was murdered in June. So he was free, he was back in the wider Welsh area, and he had recent military connections just months before a military-era Colt .45 was used in her murder.
You can see why they focused on him.
It's no surprise at all. He was the perfect narrative fit. He was the monster they already knew.
He was, and for decades, the assumption that Harold Jones was the killer just dominated the case history. It even provided a sort of, distorted psychological comfort. It allowed the community to believe the killer was a known entity, not an anonymous neighbor.
So the investigation, for all its manpower, was ultimately handicapped by the fact that they couldn't conclusively rule a suspect like Jones in or out without modern science.
Exactly. And so the cloud of suspicion hung over both of them. The innocent witness, Hubert Hoyles, and the historical monster, Harold Jones, for nearly 70 years, until science finally intervened.
The emotional cost of those decades of uncertainty, it's just immeasurable.
Before we continue, a quick reminder. Don't forget to follow Whispers of Crime on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, and other podcast platforms for daily updates on every crime, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Whispers of Crime. Share this episode with others who might have information about this case and help. Also, comment your suggestions below, drop your positive review and rating.
Okay, so by the early 2000s, the case is completely cold, a piece of Welsh history. But the memory of Muriel, the Little Nightingale, is still there. And then in 2008, everything changes.
It suddenly wrenched into the modern forensic era. It started with that discovery we mentioned earlier.
The forgotten evidence. Tell us again, how does something so critical just get overlooked for so long?
It seems it was just a routine inventory. Muriel's school coat, the one she was wearing when she was killed, was discovered tucked away in police storage. A forgotten piece of history that held the key to the future.
And after 62 years, what kind of state was it in? What did it reveal?
It revealed that crucial, decades-old semen stain. But the detail that elevates this to a moment of almost historical forensic genius is the action taken by that original 1946 investigator.
The yellow crayon.
The yellow crayon. They had identified this biological material as being significant, and they protected it by marking the spot with a circle. They had no idea what DNA was, but they knew that residue needed to be preserved.
That intuitive decision, using a simple child's coloring tool to designate this highly sensitive piece of biological evidence, it's one of the most remarkable stories in cold case history.
Absolutely. And that foresight paid off in 2008. DNA was successfully extracted from that stain. At the time, it was hailed as this monumental scientific achievement. It was believed to be the oldest forensic sample ever recovered and successfully profiled in a global murder investigation.
So this breakthrough meant the case could finally move beyond speculation. They had the killer's unique biological signature.
They did.
How quickly did this new science dismantle those decades of public assumption?
The impact was instantaneous, and it provided this long-awaited vindication for the wrongly suspected. Hubert Hoyles, the last witness who had lived under that cloud since he was a boy, voluntarily submitted a DNA sample.
And the result?
The testing was definitive. He was, and the word they used was categorically, proved not to be the source of the biological material.
The power of science to finally lift that immense psychological burden from a man in his 70s. It's just profound. All those years of stigma erased by one conclusive test.
And the same definitive science was applied to the historical prime suspect, Harold Jones.
Right.
Even though Jones had died in the 1970s, investigators were able to get comparative DNA. And testing, done as late as 2019, conclusively and definitively ruled Harold Jones out as the killer.
So after almost 70 years of everyone just knowing it was him, he was officially cleared.
Officially cleared.
This changes the entire direction of the case. If the killer wasn't the man everyone suspected, who was he?
Well, when they ran that unique DNA profile against the national database, the result came back. No match.
No match. So a new level of frustration.
Exactly. The killer's identity was known scientifically, but he hadn't been convicted of a crime that required his DNA to be in the system, or he was already dead. It meant the police had to search for him in new ways, through family trees or alternative suspects.
A ghost in the database. Someone who walked free in the post-war era, his identity locked away in a genetic code until a match could be found.
And while this forensic hunt was going on, another poignant physical detail of Muriel's life surfaced. This was the lost book mystery that emerged in 2020.
A lost book. What was the significance of that?
Decades after the murder, a book that belonged to Muriel was found in a charity shop in Carmarthen, Wales.
And Carmarthen is a good distance from her home in Penllergaer, right?
It is a considerable distance. It was a small personal memento.
The idea that the killer, or someone intimately connected to him, held on to a physical piece of Muriel's life for that long, only to discard it miles away. That says so much about the crime. Was it a trophy? A dark reminder they couldn't bear to keep, but also couldn't destroy?
Forensic psychologists often analyze this, the retention of mementos. It suggests a really intense personal connection to the victim, and possibly a period where the killer revisited the trauma mentally. The fact it was found so far away suggests the killer might have moved, or maybe even traveled specifically to dispose of it much later.
When the emotional connection had faded, but the object itself was still a risk.
Right. It moved the whole conversation away from the random wolf fantasy and towards a killer with a deeply personal, obsessive element to his crime.
So this evidence, combined with the DNA definitely ruling out the main suspects, it demanded a new focus for the investigation. Where did that profile lead them next?
The renewed investigation, now armed with the DNA profile, shifted its focus entirely. They started looking at individuals who had been overlooked in that initial media frenzy over Harold Jones, but who had direct proximity to Muriel and her family.
And this new scrutiny led them to a man named Ronald Harries.
It led them directly to Ronald Harries.
Who was he? What was his connection to Muriel?
Ronald Harries was a farmhand, and crucially, he worked for Muriel's father at Tildew Farm.
He worked for her father.
Yes. This instantly places him inside Muriel's immediate orbit. It introduces this layer of implied betrayal, the deep discomfort of a familiar face being the suspect.
So not a stranger in the woods, but someone known and potentially trusted by the family. That is a far more chilling reality. What else do we know about Harries?
Harries was a known killer. He had a significant history of violence. He was later convicted and hanged in 1954 for the brutal hammer murders of his relatives.
Hanged in 54.
So the fact that he was already a proven, executed killer in that post-war period made him an incredibly compelling, though deceased, suspect for the Drinkwater case.
Okay, so we have location, we have timing, and we have a proven capacity for extreme homicidal violence. But what's the psychological evidence that specifically connects the chaotic brutality of his known crimes to what happened to Muriel?
For that, we turn to the assessment provided by forensic historian Nell Darby. Her work outlines several crucial psychological markers that link Harries to the Muriel Drinkwater case. And this is really the intellectual justification for why investigators focused so intently on him in the 2000s.
Let's go through Darby's analysis. What was the first marker?
The first was Harries' clear and persistent sexual interest in young girls and schoolgirls. This wasn't just, a guess. It was rooted in his own life. He married a woman 5 years younger than him who he met while she was still a schoolgirl.
Okay.
And Darby noted that he possessed this deep, unhealthy fixation on the fact that his wife was a schoolgirl attending grammar school.
And Muriel, of course, was killed walking home from Gowerton Grammar School. That alignment of the victim's status with the killer's known sexual fixation, it's disturbingly precise. It suggests the motive wasn't random, but a targeted desire based on her specific status as a schoolgirl.
Exactly. The second point related to the crime signature. Darby suggested that Harry's intelligence level, combined with what she described as a childish nature, could explain the chaotic nature of Muriel's murder.
Right, the bludgeoning, the shooting, the rape. Multiple distinct methods of attack. No clear, organized plan.
The definition of overkill. The killer couldn't rely on a single, organized method. The overkill evident in Muriel's case is highly consistent with the extreme, violent, uncontrolled rage he showed in his later convicted hammer murders.
So his violent signature matched.
It matched the complexity and ferocity of what Muriel suffered. His personality seems to have been characterized by explosive, uncontrollable aggression directed specifically at vulnerable people.
And there's another piece of circumstantial evidence, something from Harry's final moments, right?
This is perhaps the most chilling piece. Just before his execution in 1954 for the Hammer murders, Harries was, trying to maintain some semblance of innocence. He denied those specific crimes.
What did he choose to talk about instead, right before he died?
He began fixating extensively, almost compulsively, on his wife's youth and her status as a schoolgirl.
Wow.
Darby interpreted this as a highly significant slip. Even when facing the gallows for other crimes, his mind just went back, involuntarily, to his deeply ingrained pedophilic interest. It was a terrifying glimpse into the compulsion that defined him.
So he denies one crime, but immediately replaces it with a fixation that perfectly matches the victimology of an unsolved one. That's incredibly powerful, even without DNA.
And the circumstantial connections just get deeper. There's a striking temporal and spatial connection to another unsolved child murder. This one happened just 10 days after Muriel's death. The murder of Sheila Martin in Kent on July 7, 1946.
10 days after Muriel, miles away in Kent, another young girl is murdered. What's the connection to Harries?
Records showed that Harries had traveled to Kent for work during that specific period. It places him squarely in the location where Sheila Martin was killed, immediately after Muriel's murder.
The pattern suggests a transient predator, a killer moving to a new location after a successful strike.
That proximity is too close to ignore. South Wales police certainly didn't. In 2009, they formally requested the original case files from Kent police to investigate this possible link.
So they saw parallels. Did they find conclusive evidence? And more importantly, did they compare DNA?
Well, publicly, they stated they found no conclusive evidence linking the crimes. But this is where the mystery again intersects with the sealed files. No DNA testing results comparing biological evidence from the two cases, if any preserved evidence even existed in the Martin case, have ever been released.
They went to the trouble of requesting the files, investigating the link, but the results of that comparison, they remain locked away.
Right. The silence surrounding the Kent connection, just like the silence surrounding Harry's own DNA, just emphasizes that this case is now defined not by what is unknown, but by what is actively being withheld.
The psychological and circumstantial case against Ronald Harries is overwhelming, and yet the conclusive, scientific proof is just denied to the public.
And that brings us to the central tension of this 78-year saga. The DNA profile exists. It excluded the historic suspects. And Ronald Harries, the family, farmhand, and executed child killer, became the overwhelming new suspect. The means to definitively prove or disprove his guilt were acquired.
But the results are suppressed.
They remain suppressed. The ultimate effort to get that proof came not from the police, but from a media investigation.
The 2020 BBC documentary, what was their role?
In 2020, the BBC team took the extraordinary step of seeking out and testing Harry's family DNA. They used the familial match method, aiming to create a DNA comparison that would link the killer's profile from Muriel's coat to Harry's surviving relatives,
Thereby establishing the identity of the source.
Exactly. And the police successfully acquired those results, either directly or via the documentary team. So the critical fact is that those DNA results, which could solve the Muriel Drinkwater murder, have never been released publicly by law enforcement.
This refusal, it just changes the whole nature of the case, doesn't it? I mean, if the results had cleared Harries, they would have announced it to direct the investigation elsewhere, just like they did with Hoyles and Jones.
You'd have to assume so. The refusal to release them strongly implies that the results point directly to him or to someone very closely related to him.
So the DNA points to Harries, a man who is dead and can't be prosecuted. What possible legal or political justification is there for withholding the truth? Why protect the identity of a deceased killer for 78 years?
And that question leads us right back to the other great act of suppression in this case, the 2010 sealing of the files.
Right. In 2010, 64 years after the crime, and significantly 2 years after they successfully got that DNA profile,
Scotland Yard took the shocking action of sealing all case files relating to Muriel Drinkwater's murder.
which prevents any public access, even through Freedom of Information requests.
Correct. When files are sealed decades after the fact, it suggests new information was introduced that officials deemed too sensitive for public scrutiny. And given the timeline, that new information almost certainly stems from those 2008 DNA results.
What could be so disruptive? What are the implications of sealing a file that should, by all rights, be historical and open to the public?
Well, researchers have speculated about a few possibilities. One is that the familial DNA results, if they pointed to Harry's, may have also implicated living family members in, a cover-up or having knowledge of the crime, or maybe just simply identified them as close relatives of a known executed murderer.
So the police might be concerned about privacy rights.
Right. Protecting the privacy of innocent surviving family members might be prioritized over providing public closure for a historical crime.
That's an uncomfortable possibility.
A second, perhaps more haunting implication is that the original 1946 investigation, the one involving Scotland Yard, may have known or strongly suspected who the killer was, maybe even Harry's, but allowed the case to stall for political or societal reasons.
Meaning the sealed files might reveal gross negligence or even active cover-up back in 1946.
It's a possibility. The fact remains that conclusive evidence exists, yet the state is the primary barrier to solving Muriel Drinkwater's murder.
So let's just summarize the unanswered questions that define this incredible injustice.
The killer has not been officially identified. Ronald Harries remains the most compelling suspect, linked by proximity, behavior, and a mountain of circumstantial evidence, yet his conclusive DNA results are intentionally withheld.
We still don't know the identity of the mystery man seen by Hubert Hoyles.
And the second murder weapon, the bludgeon, is still missing. 78 years later, the case remains unsolved.
The combination of the sealed files, the withheld DNA results, and the decades of official silence. It's ensured that the murder of the Little Nightingale remains one of the most agonizing examples of unsolved injustice in British criminal history.
It is. The scientific triumph of recovering that DNA was completely negated by the administrative decision to lock the truth away.
The fact that they recovered what was considered the oldest forensic DNA sample in a major investigation, used it to rule out all the previous suspects, only to then lock away the results that seemed to point to the true killer.
It suggests the potential truth is, for some reason, fundamentally more damaging to the state than the ongoing silence.
Muriel Drinkwater. The 12-year-old thinking on her way home, the Little Nightingale of Penllergaer Woods. She was a victim of an act of violence that shook post-war Britain, and she remains a victim of a governmental decision to prioritize secrecy over resolution.
The science is there. The DNA is there. The suspects have been narrowed down to a man who worked for her father and later became an executed killer. The only barrier to resolution is an official decision made 64 years after the crime to lock away the evidence and withhold the crucial DNA comparison.
If the oldest recovered forensic DNA sample in a major investigation points to the killer, and that killer is dead, what political or familial complication could truly justify concealing the truth for 78 years? Is protecting a deceased man's reputation or the privacy of his surviving innocent family truly more important than providing definitive closure for the family of a murdered child? That's the question we're left with.
The silence is intolerable.
Don't forget to follow Whispers of Crime on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, and other podcast platforms for daily updates on every crime, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Whispers of Crime. Like, share this episode with others who might have information about this case and help. Also comment your suggestions below. Drop your positive review and rating.
If you or anyone you know has any information regarding Muriel Drinkwater's murder, especially if you have knowledge of the Penllergaer community back in 1946, or the movements of Ronald Harries, or any details related to that missing second murder weapon, we urge you to contact South Wales Police. The case reference is known to them, and justice for Muriel is long, long overdue.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Whispers of Crime.
The Nightingale is still waiting for her song to be finished.